Well, welcome everybody. I'm sure we'll have a few more people join as we get past 1 o'clock for me here on the West Coast, 6 a.m. for Kate there in Australia. And I'm sure we have every time zone in between covered. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's so nice to see you all. Um, I am going to very briefly read a little introduction about Kate, and then I'm going to turn it over to her to do her presentation, and then we can do questions at the end. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about Kate. Kate Butler is an artist, writer, and art teacher. Raised in North Carolina, Kate studied with the Leo Marchutz School community in 2012 as an undergraduate English major from the College of Charleston. After graduating, she returned to Aix-en-Provence in the Marchutz community as an alumni fellow before making her way to Brooklyn, New York. As a graduate student at the Pratt Institute, she continued to draw and paint while experimenting with analog animation before her focus shifted to ceramics and sculpture. Since earning a dual MFA and an MS in art history in 2019, Kate has practiced, taught, and published writing in the field of ceramic sculpture while maintaining a regular drawing practice. In 2022, Kate moved with her husband Sam to Melbourne, Australia. Her creative work and teaching remain deeply informed by the lessons on art, nature, and perception imparted by the Marchutz School. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here. In a minute, I'm going to share actually, I'll just go ahead and share my screen now. And all right. So, wow. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Since I am now based in Melbourne, Australia, I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land I'm on, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I want to just acknowledge their deep and ongoing contributions to art and culture, and also pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So I'm going to begin by briefly talking about the influence of Marchutz on my art practice before moving on to how my work has evolved since. So I first studied with the Leo Marchutz School in 2012 and later returned in 2014 as an alumni fellow. And prior to coming to the school, I had taken some drawing and painting classes, but I was more focused on writing and thought I might pursue a career in film or arts journalism or something art adjacent and perhaps stable. And at Marchutz, I came to find just how meaningful the study of works of art and the practice of drawing and painting from nature could really be. And my experience at the school also really enamored me with the value of this kind of education that wasn't instrumental, but was really experiential and really holistic and called to action our whole selves. And so in a way that hadn't fully clicked before that point, I think I really learned how to learn and learned how to look deeply and with humility into nature and works of art. And I learned that so much is not evident to us at a glance, but that it takes time spent observing something for meaning to unfold. And this awareness has, the awareness of that has really served me in my art practice, but also my writing and teaching as well. So I'm going to now share a few specific moments from my time in Marchutz that resonate with the direction that my work has taken. Of course, this quote, "One must leave the paper to the power to act by itself in order to give birth to light." It's something I still think about, this quote that we would read at the very beginning of our seminar on light. I first want to just touch on an experience that has kind of resonated later with me, which is the sculpture workshop that we did with Greg Wyatt that I first attended in 2012 as a student and later in 2014 as a fellow. And as the workshop took place in Monet's home of Giverny, there was a connection that we were making between our experience drawing the space and light and atmosphere of Monet's garden and what Monet called the envelope of light and atmosphere, and the volumes of form and space that we were sculpting, making our sculptures out of. And this kind of dialogue between the atmosphere and sculptural form really informed my paintings, but also would kind of resonate with my later sculptures. The little sculpture that I ended up making was informed by the reflections of trees in the pond. And I feel this is really fitting as the idea of reflection has really recurred in my work since then. Another important experience was John's architecture tours in Aix, but also in Bonlieu and in the Vaucluse, I think specifically in Gourds. I want to specifically mention the Bories, which I think was the name of these stone hives that were built from stones kind of delicately balanced on top of one another. And I just remember being really, really moved by the sense of how they were just balanced, and there's such a primal sense of a need for shelter, and it just spoke to their integrity that they had survived to the present day, even without mortar, you know, how they were like balanced into this kind of voluminous whole of this structure. And as with the master paintings that we studied, there is a sense of like a unified volume, and a sense of integrity and aliveness and light, which of course was kind of depended on that shadowy interior. And of course, a third really pivotal moment in my time at Marchutz was the trip to Venice. And in Venice, your sense of the light and volume of nature is heightened by the presence of the water. And then you also have the architecture to which to attach a sense of structure. And the ephemerality that we experienced in painting in X was really heightened there. And there was a real imperative to paint quickly and selectively and to make peace with the fact that you couldn't capture everything. There was one particular morning around 5:30 a.m. A few of us had set up along the bridge to paint the canal, which was covered in a thick fog. And you could only paint what you saw, which was in that case so little. I did two paintings that morning. One isn't shown here. One is the canal after it cleared, and that's this painting to the right. And at that moment just felt really coherent and alive. And that's just the sense of the fog clearing and the image just coming in a way that felt kind of beyond me, beyond my own kind of intention in a way. And so when I did return to X, I found myself more attuned to the whole envelope of light and not really separating the ground and the sky and the buildings in the same way that I had before. The painting on the left is one I did before the Venice trip. It's one that I still kind of resonate with as a motif, the reflections and the sort of horizon line. But in the painting to the right, which I think I might have done on my 24th birthday, there is such a greater sense of volume and the sky and the ground participating in the same poetic structure. Now, when I talk about my work today, I often talk about light. For example, how my ceramic sculptures, which are unglazed, hold or reflect light and shadow in a way that's evocative of light in nature, but also a bit kind of dreamy and mysterious in a way. And light was the central metaphor of art that we dealt with at Marchutz. There was the light in nature, there's the light of the paper or the surface, and ultimately the light of the artist's style. And ultimately that artist's light is what emerges from the artist, from the kind of impression, those like physical marks of the hand. And the idea of the impression, like kind of broadly speaking, is something that has helped me kind of link my work in ceramics and sculpture to my work in painting and drawing. Although they're two very different processes, they both kind of involve like a really direct relationship to material or to nature. The sense of like touch and like meeting the world very directly. Richard Schiff, an art historian who wrote really beautifully on the impression, called it both an expression of nature and the artist's own being. And yeah, so while my sculptures are like definitely not impressionist in style, my practice remains very rooted in that physical contact with natural material, and then the light emerges from that. So this is a quote that I've referenced often, Virginia from To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. The idea that beautiful and bright it should be on the surface, feathery and evanescent, a sense of something, you know, things like reflecting like natural phenomena and kind of atmospheric things, but also being like very strong. And I like the idea it was to be a thing you could ruffle with your breath, a thing you could not dislodge with a team of horses. So something, yeah, being reflective and yeah, ephemeral in a way, but also having a sense of structure. So moving on to what I will call the in-between years. I just decided to put this painting here because it's one that I like that I did when I was briefly living in Boston, just from a figure model. But I did continue to paint sporadically. But just to return to the chronology, not long after I painted that last painting in X, I returned home to the US, and I had really grown as a painter, but at the same time, I was unsure if painting was really my medium. I wasn't sure if that was like where things would stop for me. And I'd learned and grown so much at Marchutz, but in a way, the story of my artistic practice as it exists today begins after I came home and had to figure out how to integrate all of that knowledge and experience into a practice that I could sustain in my quote unquote real life, in the real world, or you know, within the contemporary art world in some way. Besides painting, one avenue that I thought I might pursue was film, specifically experimental film and animation. In the years between my time as a student and a fellow, I had written my undergraduate English thesis on literary modernism and experimental film. And I had been interested in how the subjective vision of a writer like Virginia Woolf could be translated in film in a way that was authentic, not just to like a book like To the Lighthouse's content, but also to its form. And essentially, I was interested in making films that had a sense of tactility or physicality that uh, reflected an experience of embodiment that you didn't get just through the machine of a digital camera. And given this, it does make sense that eventually I found my way to the most tactile medium of all in ceramic sculpture. But anyway, that is kind of one motivating reason for my decision to pursue an MFA at the Pratt Institute, because there were facilities there to explore animation, but I could also participate in the studio program because I was a bit indecisive. And I could also get a dual degree in art history because I also still wanted to study art history. And so I could kind of do all that. So that's what I did. And so in my first year at Pratt, between reckoning with the challenge of trying to make art in a white box studio, I did end up making an animated film, which was very much by hand, just by chance. I entered it in like a million festivals, but it like won an award in Sweden, which is just kind of funny. That's that little thing there. But anyway, it was inspired by a painting that we had looked at in the Louvre, Titian's Pastoral Concert. It kind of came from, the seed of the idea came from reflecting on that painting and thinking about, yeah, how that could be the beginning of a narrative. That painting, in that painting, there are these two figures who convey a sense of quiet anticipation. There's one who is holding a music without strings, and there's a sense of like the silence before music is played. And um, Titian was a painter from Venice, and it just kind of evolved from there. So I do want to just quickly show you like a clip from that. Oh, I thought it was going to embed. Hold on. Okay. Maybe I will just link this, and well, maybe it would, okay. I'm gonna link this and you can watch it later. Um, yeah,
And
okay.
I can include it in the follow-up notes too for
Yeah,
everybody.
perfect. Yeah, and you can see it. Yeah, but I think you can kind of see from the image here that yeah, I was really doing it. I did it like all by myself, which nobody should make a film just by themselves. It's like a very much a collaborative thing. But yeah, I think I really enjoyed constructing the set, and I realized how much I like to build things and construct things by hand. And I was in painting these little pieces of plexiglass with oil paint that would be illuminated with a from a light box. Was kind of had it had kind of a sense of tactility that I was after in some way. And it's about a Venetian gondolier who has this who follows a magical illuminated fish. So yeah, you can watch that later if you would like. So I was working on that partly, but then I was also making or trying to make work in the studio. And um you know, in that first year, it was just challenging in a way to find that some of the things I'd learned, at least to the extent that I was able to express them, weren't entirely legible by my peers. You know, it was such a different context. And that moving to an entirely different context, as I found again, can be challenging. That said, a real turning point in my studio practice came when approaching the end of the first semester. I started to make these repetitive line drawings that became sort of abstracted landscape compositions. And in making them, there was sort of a sense of like just putting one foot in front of the other and just allowing something to emerge, and it just kind of came from there. I think the one on the far left was maybe the first that I did, and it was just like a cheap beak pin on paper. But these really emerged to represent the night sky. The kind of later ones I did were really reflecting on the sense of how it feels to inhabit a vast landscape at night, and how you might feel being in the presence of really tall mountains or the big night sky, and how in the absence of visual cues to which to orient yourself, you physically feel yourself in the landscape. um, and that while you might feel disoriented in some sense because it's dark, the vastness of everything also sort of puts you in your place and orients you in a certain way. And I think that was kind of analogous to the way I approach these. You know, I felt really disoriented, but this kind of image emerged that kind of reminded me of like where I am in some like very big fundamental sense. And I was thinking back to El Greco's view of Toledo quite a lot. These are two others that I did as etchings, prints. Yeah, the one on the right, I was thinking a lot about View of Toledo, and also just kind of reflections of ground to sky in a slightly more abstracted sense. Um, and I do think of this is El Greco's View of Toledo, by the way. I imagine many of you are familiar with this. But yeah, I didn't continue to do these for much longer. I think because they lacked the sort of physicality that I wanted from drawings, or and the process wasn't something that I felt like I could sustain forever. Like I was still really connected to drawing from life. but I still refer to them, I still think of them as a sort of pithy distillation of a pretty central motif of mine of the sense of the vast night sky and the horizon line, um, and that kind of motif. So I actually did, oh, and I did want to quickly mention some works that I came that I got to know around this time in New York. I really feel just seeing like one of them doesn't totally encapsulate what these artists' work is entirely, but I saw a show at the Guggenheim of the work of Agnes Martin, who was making these like repetitive, it was kind of like she was kind of monastic in a way. Like she kind of retreated from life in New York and lived a very monkish life in New Mexico. But anyway, she was making these like repetitive line drawings that had very slight variations for the artist hand and had a really kind of, yeah, beautiful quivering aliveness. And that was just kind of a discovery to me to understand that that type of abstraction could be soulful. And then also I learned about Vija Selmans, who kind of as a reference for like the motif of the big night sky was also she was drawing from photographs, but there was a sense of like quiet immensity and a sense of reflecting on really big things that or maybe even beyond human subjectivity. But yeah, Vija Selmans and Agnes Martin, two female artists who were I don't know, kind of contemplative in nature that I resonated with around that time. So I did return to painting and drawing from nature for a period. I went on I briefly visited Marchutz in 2017, and after having done those drawings, we just had one outing out in the fields, and I did these that were very vertical and kind of underneath the horizon in a way, just like looking into the dense I want to call it dense bush because I'm in Australia, but the dense grass. And then in late summer 2017, I spent some time painting in the forest in Prospect Park. And that was a really special experience and a special period of time. Really empowering just to feel that I could set up my easel in a forest in Prospect Park, and then I could still kind of tap into the sort of the exploration of painting and light and space and everything else that I was really into at Marchutz. And the motif that I was looking at was a particular patch of forest that really angled down sharply, and so that kind of eliminated like a flat ground, and there was a greater sense of verticality and of like looking down into this kind of spacious forest. So I was kind of looking down into these trees and did the same, painted from that motif several times on wood panels. The one on the top was probably like one of those, yeah, really special experiences painting that's a bit like Zen in the Art of Archery, where there's just something else it just happened, and it felt like a really profound experience. And yeah, pretty special to tap into that in New York and focus on the verticality of the trunks and how they kind of danced with each other and maybe related to human relationships in some sense. And this brings us to finding my medium, sort of. I mean, I think I'm not solely, I mean, I still consider myself a multidisciplinary artist, but really connecting with clay was a pivotal point in my journey. And so as I was winding down painting in the forest, I was beginning to build some momentum in ceramics and sculpture. My mom is a ceramicist and a craft artist, and I grew up making pottery, but it was really only around this time, like fall 2017, my second year at Pratt, in taking the ceramics class, that I really began to discover how connected I felt to clay. And, you know, one thing about making art in that sort of environment was, like I found it really difficult to work from like reference material, or to just yeah, work in a white box studio. But it was pretty cool to find that I could make things, that I could make things in a studio environment. And I did really want a consistent studio practice. Like that was something that I felt I needed. And so I found that in clay. Um, touch is the unconscious of vision. That's a phrase I think about a lot. And I think some of the works I would make in clay reflect on a maybe slightly more unconscious or kind of subliminal relationship to forms in nature, a little bit surreal. And so I'm going to kind of return to this, but I just want to first share some work that I encountered around this time, which was I happened upon a show of ceramic sculptures at a gallery in the Lower East Side, at Stephen Harvey Fine Arts Project, Fine Arts Projects, and the artist was Stanley Rosen. And these were really really impactful for me, seeing these ceramic sculptures at a time when I was just beginning to make work in clay. And they kind of felt like the primal architecture, the vernacular architecture that we had seen in the Vaucluse. And they were also just built with such care, like all these like tiny little pinches of clay that you could sense the artist's hand, but also they were just very raw, and you could sense like the reality of the material as well. There's also like a sense of, I would write about this later, but sense of interiority and imagine like hidden spaces. It wasn't the sort of like, I guess, extroverted ceramic sculpture that is associated with like the mid 20th century in America. It was really contemplative and beautiful in that way. And yeah, in a way, I feel like my interest in this sort of work calls back to ideas I was thinking about with experimental film, the idea that like the more tactile expression actually can get to an expression of interiority. Um, and I would eventually write my master's art history thesis on Stanley's work, contextualizing it in the art of the time. And my husband Sam and I eventually would go to visit Stanley, and I would visit Stanley and his wife Jane. It was really thanks to her that I was able to make that trip. And I would write my master's art history thesis on his work, and eventually adapt it into an essay for the next show at Stephen Harvey Fine Arts Project, which was very special. Like the next show of Stanley's work at Stephen Harvey. Yeah, that was really special. Because I had seen that show at the beginning of my ceramics journey, and like I think at the very end of my time in New York, shaping space was the next solo show of Stanley's work, and my piece of writing was a part of that. And that's a whole nother story. I mean, our visit to Jane and Stanley, our visits, we went back. They were very special. Anyway, I'll link to that in the chat later. But anyway, in my own sculpture, I was building organic forms that were kind of architectural in a way. They would begin with radial geometric patterns and kind of grow out from there. And I was really kind of thinking of balancing form and space to create volume. Here's Stanley. Okay. Yeah, just thinking about creating for like a balance of form and space. You know, I had also been working in the forest recently, and so I was thinking of a forest and how you have just the light and shadow, and also sense of kind of in-betweenness and mystery. Anyway, I don't think I would have worked in this way had I not had the experiences with painting and drawing, and thinking about balancing form and space. And yeah, I was kind of interested in creating interior spaces that people could look into a little bit. I mean, in a different way than Stanley's, a sense of interiority. Yes. Yeah, so that was like 2017, 2018. And I was thinking back and making some of these again to forms of plants, like radial geometry and how things kind of grow, and also to the pattern language by Christopher Alexander. There's a particular point in that book where he was talking about like how patterns grow and emerge. And yeah, I was just resonating with geometric patterns, which I still do. And geometric patterns in folk art are something I refer to a lot. So I was making these sculptures, and then actually on one of my first visits to Australia, I made these drawings, which I'm kind of happy with, and I think in some way have a maybe similar sense of space. And I was thinking a bit of the surface as I don't know, kind of like a veil or a shield, or something where you have a sense of like a glittering, vibrant surface, but you have a sense of maybe there's something behind that as well. And continuing to really focus on the light of the page and trying to like pursue that and keep that practice alive in between doing the other stuff. Uh,
Beautiful.
Thanks. So around the time that I graduated, I began to become familiar with what some other ceramic artists were doing in New York. And this is not one of those, but there are several who are influenced by a French ceramicist named Valentine Schlegel, who was making forms that were had like more like active contours and kind of jutted out into space in more of a way, and had a certain sculptural sense that I hadn't really been familiar with in ceramic sculpture yet. And I was also seeing a lot of work that had this more like bulbous quality that was a little bit more connected to the design world and was kind of going between, yeah, sculptural forms and functional forms, that, you could be making objects and you could be making sculptures and they could kind of be in dialogue. And so my work, this is like a few kind of, a couple years later, I think. But my work became maybe a little bit more biomorphic and less architectural and a little bit more fluid. And that felt good just because I feel like I'm always wrestling between like I don't know, my experience of drawing and like, yeah, how do I want a sculpture to translate that? If it's not going to be like a figure, how do I translate I guess experiences of landscape in a ceramic sculpture that's maybe sort of abstract and has formal integrity, but also references an experience of nature, and these kind of experiences of landscape and stuff. So these are just a few examples of some pieces that kind of came next. The piece on the left and the right in this image, I was thinking about the horizon line and something above and below. And and just kind of in how an organic form would follow that. And also thinking about just facets of light and shadow and how a sculpture would hold that light and shadow. And sometimes making like functional forms like bowls. I also started making pieces inspired by clouds. And this is, I think, the first one I made, which was after an actual cloud that I saw, or like kind of a sneaking cloud that I saw when I was at my family's place in the mountains. And I think, in part because I was working in ceramic studios and everybody was making functional work, and I was coming in kind of more of as a sculptor, as an artist, but I was like, well, I mean, I'm in ceramic studios and I do kind of like to make objects. And so that did kind of push me in a direction for a period of really focusing a little bit more on making functional things and that being a part of my sculpture practice. These are some examples of cups that I made and then later slip cast and was able to reproduce. And they all kind of began with the pressure of my hand on the clay. And that was kind of the concept behind some of the functional pieces that I was doing, is like pressing my hand. I mean, the mug in the middle, the handle started with me gripping a piece of clay um, and and kind of building out from there. And I wanted like whoever like holds it to have that relationship to it that's tactile in that way. And it's also interesting, I find that like the sense of touch also introduces like a sense of light and shadow in a beautiful way. And then I also started to make lighting or lamps. Probably better to call it lighting because they're kind of in between sculpture and something else. But the lighting has remained something that has continued to be interesting to me as like a functional application of my sculpture. And I'm interested in light just as an artist and as a sculptor, as someone who draws and does other things. I think light has always been a really important part of that. And so yeah, I'm interested with my lighting and how light reflects off a surface. And I'm thinking a lot about reflective light, reflected light. And I think that kind of touches on a larger theme in my work of, even with like the impression, it's like the trace of something, it's not the thing itself. And yeah, it's interesting that this somehow relates to that, the idea of a reflection or an echo. And also an influence in some way with my lighting has been all the Japanese environmental music that my partner Sam and I listen to, or like also you can call it just ambient music. And a lot of this music was like meant to be played at the same volume as like the air conditioner or another like household appliance. And I've found that like listening to it's like it's not the focus of your attention, but it affects the space that you're in. It's like part of the space. And so I kind of think my lighting has that like a similar relationship um to a person in a space. It's not the focus of your attention, but it affects your sense of inhabiting a space. And something also I like about this sort of music is that because it's so muted, I find that I start to hear music in just random things in like household appliances or something. And so I like to think that with my lighting, there's references to how you see light outdoors, whether it's like reflected off architecture or through something in nature. And I like to think that maybe it might help, I don't know, people might see some things in a different way if they're looking at these things a lot. And so kind of from here, I started again, kind of continuing to work on sculptures where there's a sense of a horizon line. There's a sense of kind of a natural landscape, some evocation of a natural space, and thinking a bit still of that kind of vast sense of the stars and the cosmos. And this to me, I think of it as kind of a moon at night. And yeah, it feels like a little bit more of, I guess, a surreal relationship to forms in nature. And yeah, sometimes I think I'm like, maybe I'm Giacometti in his surrealist phase and I'll like go back to like sculpting from life one day. But yeah, this is kind of where a lot of my work was at when I was in New York. just, this is a quote from I in Mind, Merleau-Ponty, the idea of finding an underlying motif to sustain their introspection of the world. And I like to think that maybe some of my work can help sustain introspection and kind of bring people into the similar experience that for me motivated it. And so a kind of important body of work that emerged when I was in New York were sculptures inspired by clouds. I mentioned that there was one kind of smaller one that that I started when I was looking at like a sneaking cloud through the North Carolina hills. And yeah, I think they also had a greater sense of gesture that felt really exciting to me, and also a sense of light and shadow and movement, and maybe even felt like kind of a gestural line. And yeah, it was yeah, exciting to find how gestural these were. And I really just fell in love with the process of carving clay. I really like to carve, and um, as well as kind of pinch and touch, like use tools to kind of refine the facets of light and shadow and develop the sense of movement. Um, and something that I, well, I'll mention it here. I wanted to maybe mention it earlier, but is a sense of like in smaller scale sculptures, there's this idea in this book, Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard, of intimate immensity, in the sense of like sometimes like smaller spaces can help you imagine your way into like a imaginative sense of a large vast space. So that idea of intimate immensity has been something that has kind of remained in my mind through a lot of this work. And so here are a few others. This is just the other side of that one, but I quite like this side and how it just has that kind of wavy line. And these are others. And these sort of developed into, I did a few pieces. These are really challenging to make, but where you had the kind of undulating form that went around. And I was here thinking of like the kind of openness of a valley and a landscape that just kind of surrounds you. And yeah, so I was making this sort of, I guess, landscape inspired work. And I still kind of am. I think like landscape is kind of my main reference. It's landscape, and then it kind of becomes a little bit abstracted. But I remain interested in maybe one day working more from the figure. And I did have the opportunity to do some sculptures that were figurative in 2021 and 2022. I was a resident teaching artist with the nonprofit Project Art, and all of the residents were given a modest budget to create art that reflected on our teaching experience. And I decided to make sculptures inspired by the self-portraits that students made in my classes. And they range in ages from like 4 to 11, these particular students whose portraits are here. And this was really special on so many levels, but I found it really exciting to make figurative works that felt very alive and had such personality, but also had a sense of formal unity. One thing that became very important in the process of making these was the gaze of each student's drawing, and that how they illustrated their eyes was different in every single case. And how do you translate the sense of dark and light values into a sculpture? And it really varied. Some were kind of had like indentation, some the eyes kind of poke out, and that felt really like the essence of their character was in the eyes. This one on the top in particular was really exciting to me. This kid was 4 years old, and his drawing was right here, Alex. And I mean, it's just like a cursive, I mean, it's amazing. This 4-year-old, it's just like this, I don't know, I was so amazed by that. And that was really exciting to make a sculpture from that. And here's another one that I made from a drawing. This was from a 10-year-old named Caitlin. And I had only taught these, so this is kind of all of them together. I'd only taught these children remotely via Zoom. And so at the end of the semester, we held a gathering at their local library, and I gave each of the 10 students their sculptures, which felt like the right way to do it. I wanted to, in doing these sculptures, kind of commemorate where their creativity is at as a child, and how, they'll develop more skills. They'll, maybe start worrying about being really, about perfection in drawing. And like, I don't want them to lose sight of the really innate sense of expression that they have within them, that they have as children. So I hope that in being owning a sculpture based on their childhood self-portrait, that'll be something that can stick with them. And yeah, this was me presenting some of those sculptures at the public library, and that drawing by Alex, the 4-year-old. So that brings us to where I am now in Australia. This photo here is from a trip we took to Namibia, and there's really a sense of like vast empty space that was just felt like kind of the in-between point between our life in New York and how it would transform in Australia. So coming back, I continued to draw. I will go through phases where I'm drawing quite a bit, and after leaving New York, between the sort of moments of sculpture that I talked about, I was actually getting a little bit, not quite burnt out, but like between my other jobs, I was in my studio, I was doing a lot of like fulfilling cup orders and like getting into the kind of production stuff that was really, and just doing commissions of the more functional things. And I felt like I was kind of tapping into like the lowest common denominator of like what my art could be like. And I don't know, I like to make functional things and for them to be a part of people's lives, but it wasn't really, my studio practice wasn't feeding me in the way that I wanted it to. And so it did take me a bit of time to, kind of reevaluate and think, how do I want to reapproach things? So I was drawing, and I took a job at a commercial gallery, which is another story. But I think, it took time for me to like kind of come back to where I am now. I started doing life drawing classes, and I've continued to do that pretty much every week. I have a pretty busy teaching schedule now, and so I haven't been able to do it for a couple weeks, but that has been really kind of an important, like what has been sustaining my drawing practice has been my going to life drawing. And I really like drawing people, and that has been really important, and I think has informed how my sculptures have evolved. So one also like really important influence since moving to Melbourne has been the School of Clay and Art. So I came to SOCA, as it's called, and taught a couple of classes and did studio tours in exchange for participating in their studio practice program, which is like a day-long Friday thing. And SOCA was really incredible. They promoted really similar values, like the kind of values that were really integral to Marchutz, but in ceramics, like a connection to nature and natural materials, like a value on objects that feel alive in a mysterious way and relate to our experience of being. And when I was there, I experimented with natural materials and additives to clay, and learned about mixing natural glazes. and started thinking more critically about like where my materials come from and how I can have some relationship to where they come from, and their like natural origins, and just the realities of extraction. Yeah, the extraction of material. So that has been really important. Yeah, and how can I express a sort of reverence to natural materials? And so I did some little studies. I did a bowl inspired by a shell. And I think when I was there, I really came to terms with the fact that I'm not a ceramicist. And being in the ceramics environment, it really made me realize how um, I'm much more of a sculptor, and probably make better work when I'm um, working on my own, basically, and not in a ceramics environment. But at the same time, it was like a really lovely community and really awesome to tap into that. Um, and so after I left my gallery job, about 8 months, 9 months into living here, and I started to set up my studio. And I like the kind of first pieces I made were these little studies that I had begun to make using pieces of slabs. And I really wanted every work to be to invite a process of discovery, and not just to be like building and executing, and um, still kind of thinking about landscape with these, and like the idea of like vertical landscape. And so these smaller studies, I applied the same kind of process to slightly larger sculptures that I continue to make today. And so these are some of those. And I'm still thinking about horizon lines and the sense of what's in this, like how the relationship of the ground to sky. And I think drawing a lot has informed my sense of like wanting to create a sense of like light and shadow and a reflective surface that's unglazed, and really has a sense of like the raw material. And then for these, there was a couple of things I was thinking about. One, I had been on a trip to London for a friend's wedding and had seen at the Victoria and Albert Museum these tall carved columns. And I was also thinking of vertical landscapes like this Chinese work. So that was informing those. And also the sort of lighting that I have been doing, still like thinking about creating facets of light and shadow. And yeah, just a sense of like volume and structure, and light and how light manifests in nature, I guess. And this was another, like I continued to make some of the type of lamp forms that I was making before, informed by architecture, and that's an example of this. And another one, this one actually makes the pattern of a star in its shadow, which you can't see here, but it's yeah, I liked that. And this one, just to show you a bit of my process. I'm wrapping up here, by the way. I know it's taken pretty long, but yeah, this one I created by pressing clay into an egg carton mold, and I sometimes use press molds from plaster that I make myself to create forms like this. And finally, currently, I've been thinking about making much larger work, and kind of considering how when you have kind of larger scale pieces, how scale can be part of the content, basically, and how maybe it's okay if it's very abstracted, and part of the content is your relationship to this really tall thing. So these are some studies that I've been doing, and that's it. Merci. Thank you so much. That's it. I'll start
Yay,
this one.
thank you so much, Kate. That was so beautiful. And don't worry, don't apologize for um, for the time. It's wonderful. We love hearing all the different stages of it, so
Mm.
never apologize for that. Um, I will open it up now for questions. If you guys have a question, I'm happy to help sort of call on people. We're a relatively intimate group here, so it's not going to be too hard. But if you just want to like sort of raise your hand like this and make sure to take yourself off mute to ask a question, that would be great. Um, I'll get us started. Kate, I loved what you just said a couple minutes ago that you're trying to keep the process of discovery in your practice, not just building and executing. And I loved what you said about how you're making your sculptures like that, because sort of the whole time I was thinking, do you make drawings first before you sculpt, or do you go straight in with the clay? So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when it's come to doing sculptures based on like figures or portraits, I've worked from drawings and that's been really exciting. And I like to work from drawings in that way, like for the kid portraits. But yeah, for these, it's just been kind of jumping in. And what I start with is I start with the process, and the process has like the kind of sense of the constraints that will allow me to make discoveries within those constraints and within that process. And using slabs and cutting out like slab shapes. I mean, it starts with it like it means nothing when it starts, right? Like you have clay and then you have shapes, and the shapes don't mean anything. And then you build them together, and like gradually I find like the images and references emerge from that. And I find that just really interesting that it like, yeah, that all some of those yeah, the motifs are kind of within me in some sense. Yeah. And the idea is that it could be kind of endlessly generative, that sort of process.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other questions out there for Kate? Remember to take yourself off of mute. No, no questions, comments. Oh,
Oh,
Grace, you go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, I know Kate real well. I'm her mother. Um,
So
but I'm
sweet.
just fascinated by the connection between the landscape and the vastness of painting, like in Marchutz and the land there, and then coming into this intimate relationship with the clay. And I just wonder about they're both just so your personal experience with the land and your personal experience with the clay. And I'm wondering what is there a way you could articulate that connection between the vastness and then the more personal, intimate with
Yeah.
the clay?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of intimate immensity speaks to me, like the sense of like sometimes like intimate spaces can evoke, I mean, I guess the kind of vast sense of vastness, I think in part through the verticality and the sense that's like directing your eye upward. Um and then yeah, also in the sense of like sometimes like certain kinds of small intimate spaces can evoke that vastness. But yeah, I mean, I think like the sense of like horizon lines and the kind of passage upward is how I think of it, referring to that experience of vastness in some way. Yeah. And just evocations of like stars and, you know, the type of like, um, yeah, light and the moon. And I don't know, I feel like things like kind of evocations of like celestial, yeah, things in the moon and stars sometimes come in, and yeah, I think that kind of points to that as well.
Yeah, I see such a personal relationship with those things you're interacting with. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Any other questions? Alan, do you want to say something? You're on mute.
Yes, I, uh, can you hear me? Yeah. Kate, I'm really interested in those because earlier you talked about, oh, maybe someday I'll go back to Giacometti, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Then when we got down to those portraits, I'm really interested in could we look at the children's portraits with your sculptures just a second? Because I find something really
Yeah, for
beautiful.
sure.
I
Yeah,
don't know
here.
if you can bring,
Yeah, I can bring it
but I was
back.
just wondering, uh, because that's incredible.
Yeah.
The drawings are really beautiful.
Yeah.
We're no, let's see, there, yeah, there's the paintings, and then if you go to your sculptures,
Yeah.
not those, but the
Yeah.
where you have a whole bunch of there, yeah.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting. I was just wondering if you, when you were doing those sculptures, were you more because you were talking about the gaze or the
Yeah.
eyes and the way the eyes were looking, and I
Yeah.
find that in those heads, all of the heads and the way they operate with the space around the head seem
Yeah.
really, really alive. And but sometimes when I get down, I'm just wondering how, when I get down to the figure part,
Yeah.
the shoulder part, uh, I don't feel that same. I'm wondering if you focus more on the heads and the bases, they
Mm.
seem less alive.
Oh
Not as
yeah. I mean,
the bases of your sculptures that you did down below.
hmm.
But I don't know if yeah, I was just wondering if you were more uh was that gaze the thing that you were, because it's really beautiful, I think, the heads, the way the heads are.
Hmm. Yeah, I see what you're
More
saying.
imagination. Seems like there's a lot of life in the way the
Yeah.
eyes, the nose, and the heads, the way everything sits.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think like one reason why I built these kind of structures for them, but was because the bases they did feel like fragments because they were from drawings and like I didn't know how else to resolve the fact that it just ended. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing with the bases of not the kind of bases of them not having that sense of aliveness that the heads do.
Is that the same sculpture right there? The same girl? Is that down?
Yeah, yeah. So she's right
Was that
here.
same? Wow, go back up.
Yeah,
That's the same one. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, you see, I find that the way that works with her in the interior
yeah,
is that really works a lot in terms of the base in relation to what's around that head.
yeah,
That's beautiful. It seems that's
yeah,
more together than, not that it's not together, but it seems more whole when it's in its little home
yeah,
than when it's sitting
totally.
on the table.
Yeah.
But
That was kind of the I mean these I just showed this just because like you see them all together, but the
yeah,
ones that I kind of felt like my own work and felt finished were these ones where they were in these cubbies because
yeah,
they, you know, the image was in that frame and it felt like and also the sense of within that shadow, it placing it in this
yeah.
shadowy enclave, you get a different sense of light and shadow, and maybe even like intensified shadows on the faces. Um,
So
and
did all the ones on, sorry, did all the ones on the table have a cubby? Their own little cubby?
no, I mean, I just didn't have time. But yeah, I think the cubbies were like a kind of like I kind of think they were essential to the works.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah,
But beautiful, the sense of regard, that
yeah.
talks about in
Mm,
terms of abstraction that you used in the heads and the faces and the eyes and the nose and the mouth.
mm.
Very, very alive.
Mm. Yeah, it was really, really inspiring, you know, like the way they did eyes was like no adult would do that with like these you know, Cyrus who Cyrus and Alex, who are both 4 years old, were 4 years old. The way they did eyes, it's
Yeah.
just so there's such an essence of character that is like quite profound. Yeah, especially from those young ones.
I'm struck by the one sculpture that we were just looking at that you put it in the interior space there. And
Mm.
that putting that sculpture in that intimate space evokes the vastness of that soul of that child.
Mm,
And just the way that shoulder is turned,
mm,
I just think it's fantastic. I I see a relationship between that and the Mont Saint Victoire painting.
mm. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, something about having it in that space. And then it makes it a little bit more like a painting where there's the focus on looking into something, looking into a space rather than at something. And I think that's something I've thought a lot about with sculpture, sculpture exists in real space. And yeah, how do you I think I was drawn to Stanley Rosen's work because you're looking into it and you're having a quite an intimate experience with that in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, his work is beautiful. That flat sort of flat pyramid piece, incredible.
Yeah, yeah. Like on so many levels. Yeah, I was thinking when I was writing a lot about how in looking into it, you're looking into a space, but you're also looking at spaces that you can't see. Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. The essay's available for those who want to read it.
Well,
But yeah,
that brings to mind the lighting. I really dig the lighting.
oh, thank you.
Looking
Yeah,
into an interior space you can't see.
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
exactly like what's going on in those lights. It's kind of groovy. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't mind having one.
Yeah, I like to think that they kind of fit into, yeah, the larger ideas of like space. And like I said, like the impression, reflected light, the trace of something rather than the thing itself. And um, yeah, thank you.
Oh,
You let
beautiful,
people
Kate. Thank you
use
so
those?
much for sharing. Oh,
Thanks.
go ahead, Alan.
And, I had one, have to ask this question though. When you went to your MFA program, how did your professors relate to your paintings that you showed them from the landscape?
The ones I
Did they
did,
get it?
some did more than others. Yeah. And like I think also once I was doing the paintings in New York and I had like I think the thing is that the things I brought back from our shoots, I didn't have like there wasn't so much of a consistent repetition of a motif. Like there was a little like some here, some there. And yeah, I mean, there was one teacher in particular, and I was also just doing a lot of drawings because I couldn't, like, that's kind of all I felt like I could do. So yeah, some more than others. Like, I think there's one teacher who um just didn't didn't jive with it at all, and maybe had a more, I guess, like teleological view of art history, where it's like, all right, well, art history is developed to this place and that's where we are. But I think like what I found, not just with my prop professors, but with the New York art world in general, is it's like there's totally room for that kind of work. And I think the word is like it's pluralistic. Like there's this one professor who was like kind of got it a little, like a little bit, and especially when I kind of talked about it, he was like, okay. And he pointed me to Stephen Harvey Fine Arts Projects, which was the gallery where Stanley's work was, and Stephen also shows a lot of painting that might resonate with the type of work we were doing at Marchutz. And I think through that gallery, I kind of found like, oh wow, like people are doing work that is really inspired by looking at the world, looking into the world, and has that sort of like poetic depth. And like there are plenty of art, and also like people associated with the New York Studio School, where I took a couple classes that is more like aligned with Marchutz. So while I didn't necessarily find it like immediately at Pratt, I definitely found it in New York in some way, if that makes sense. And yeah, there are a couple
Yeah.
professors who are like,
I find that your drawing progressed over those last landscape drawings that you
hmm,
showed us were
yeah,
much more particular to you. They had much more of you in them than say sort of there's another Marchutz school painting, right? They were very
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Full.
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, it definitely felt like I kind of going away and going off on my own, and, you know, doing those more abstracted drawings, which kind of distilled certain qualities, like having done that for me, I think was really helpful. And then having a sense of like, oh, this is some essence of, you know, what I'm focused on. I'm focused on the surface, the light of the surface. And I'm focused, yeah, I gravitate toward motifs where there is quite a lot of like surface, I don't know, glittering veil of something. And yeah, I found that like slowly I've been able to like continue to cultivate that and find some like continue to like find my voice. Yeah, which matters to me. So yeah, thank you. The challenge is turning something like that into a paint, like getting to painting like that. And I have been out and painted a bit here. And like to think I'd go back to it, but I'm just so deep into the ceramic sculpture that it's kind of like, all right, this is where we are. Like, let's ride it out. See where it continues to evolve. So yeah.
Mary Pat, do you have a question? Go ahead. You just have to unmute yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go ahead and unmute? You're on mute automatically. Here, let me see if I can help.
Still on mute.
Let's see.
Oh, we can't hear you, Mary Pat. Ask to unmute.
You might have a little thing at the bottom of your screen that says mute or unmute. And if you just click on that, it should unmute you. I wish I could do it for you. Let's see.
There might be a blue box. Is there a little blue box in your screen with 3 little dots? No, that's chat pen. How do you mute?
You could put write it in the chat, Mary Pat. She's like, I'll call you.
Oh yeah, if you can click on chat, you can write it. Oh darn. Sorry, Mary Pat.
Yeah, Mary Pat, you can
I wish
text
I could
me
help
later
better.
and I'll answer your question. Yeah, call you.
Any other questions for Kate before we wrap up? Well, let's just give a big, virtual round of applause for Kate, and a big thank you, Kate, for waking up so early and giving this talk.
Yeah.
We so appreciated it. That was so beautiful. I was taking so many notes, and I know Kathleen over there was too. And we just appreciate you so much for taking the time to give such a lovely talk. Alan, do you have something to say?
Yes.
Or are you just waving?
Also, she wrote when she was the artist fellow, that we call them. She wrote a beautiful blog that's still online. If people want to go on and find that, she wrote some beautiful blog entries. One really beautiful blog entry about Billy Wayman when Billy died.
Oh yeah.
It was simple. What's the name?
That's great.
What's the blog name again?
I can link to that as well. I can find it and link to it. Yeah, I forget the name of it, but I'll find it and link to it in the follow-up notes and the recording. Well, thank you so much, Kate, and thank you all of you for joining us. Look out for an email from me with the recording and these follow-up notes, and feel free to share the recording with everybody, all your friends and contacts and network and everything. And thank you again, Kate. We so appreciate you.
So beautiful, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks.
John doesn't know how to do these things sometimes. John and I are going to listen to it tomorrow together.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's really nice to hear. Awesome. Cool.
Thanks so much, Kate. That was awesome to hear what you've been up to.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Nico, how you doing, buddy? Doing great work, Nick.
Bye.
Hanging out, man.
Hey, Nick.
Hi, Mary.
Okay.
Hi, Mary.
Oh, she's gone. Kate, thank you. That was really so nourishing and beautiful, so eloquent.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Beautiful
It's like, thanks. It's cool to share.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, come back around and share, how things have evolved and even though it's a bit different. Still thinking about Marchutz all the time. So
Oh
thanks,
yeah, well, you did
Yeah.
that was a really beautifully made presentation, and there was such a through line.
Gorgeous.
Each part gathered everything together. It was really
Mm.
beautiful, Kate.
Thanks. Yeah,
Well
appreciate
done,
it.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
So I don't know
Rose
what
was texting
theological
back and forth, saying that this is so beautiful.
I know Kathleen and I always have a little thread going during talks saying, wow, I'm
Yeah.
going to use that quote. Wow, that's gorgeous. And our pages of notes, we're both the same with our pen and paper.
Yeah.
Great.
Well,
Mark of
thank
how
you,
much-
Kate. Take
It's a
care and
mark of-
stay in touch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Great to see you guys. Bye.
Come back to
Hi,
come back
Sam.
to France with Sam too.
I will.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye.
Take
Bye, dear
care.
Rose.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.